Okay, into the deep wood, no, beyond the deep woods, and we're going to do chapter 5, but let's talk about chapter 4. Remember, the forest is getting scary, and he's worried that he's going to get eaten by some bad things. And then remember, he saw somebody and he thought it was his mother, but then it turned out to be that scary thing. Remember that scary thing? And it was this bird that saved him. And the bird said that if he needed help, all he had to do was yell for him, the catterbird. And but then he said, "I need you now." But then it flew off. Okay, chapter 5 is called The Blood Oak. At first it was just a tickle, which Twig swatted away in his sleep. He smacked his lips drowsily and rolled over onto his side. Nestling in his cot of leaves beneath the ancient spreading tree, Twig looked so young and small and vulnerable. A long, thin, squirmy creature, it was doing the tickling. As Twig's breathing grew more regular once again, it wiggled around in midair directly in front of his face. It flexed and wreathed in the warm air each time Twig breathed out. All at once, it darted forwards and began probing the skin around the boy's mouth. Twig grumbled sleepily, and his hand brushed at his lips. The squirmy creature dodged the slender fingers and scurried up into the dark tunnel of the warmth above. Twig sat bolt upright, instantly wide awake. His heart pounded. There was something up his left nostril. Oh, yikes. He grabbed his nose and squeezed it till his eyes watered. Abruptly, the whatever it was scraped down over the soft membrane inside his nose and was out. Twig winced and his eyes grew screwed shut with pain. His heart pounded all the more furiously. What was there? What could it possibly be? Fear and hunger wrestled with one another in the pit of Twig's stomach. Scarcely daring to look, Twig peered out through the crack in one eye. Catching sight of a flash of emerald green, Twig feared the worst and scuttled back on his hands and feet. The next moment, he slipped his legs. His legs shot out in front of him, and he came crashing down on his elbows. He stared back into the gloomy half-light of the new morning. The wiggling green creature had not moved. "I'm being silly," Twig muttered. "It's just a caterpillar." Look at the picture. I don't think that looks like a caterpillar. Leaning back, he squinted up into the dark canopy. Behind black leaves, the sky had turned from brown to red. The air was warm, but the backs of his legs were damp with the early morning moisture of the deep woods. It was time to make a move. Twig climbed to his feet and was brushing the twigs and leaves out of the hamel horn silk waistcoat when, whoosh, the air hissed with the sound of a lashing whip. Twig gasped and stared in frozen horror as the emerald green caterpillar lunged at him and flew around his outstretched wrist once, twice, 3 times. "Ah!" he screamed as sharp horns dug into his skin, and he cursed himself for letting his guard slip. For the wiggly green creature wasn't a caterpillar at all. It was a creeper, a tendril, the emerald tip of a long and viciously barbed vine that wreathed and swayed through the shadowy forest like a serpent, seeking out warm-blooded prey. Twig had been lassoed by the terrible terry vine. "Let me go," he cried, tugging frantically at the stout vine. "Let me go!" As he pulled, so the claw-like thorns punctured his skin and sank deep into the softness of his inner arm. Twig yelped with pain and watched terrified as tiny crimson beads of blood grew and burst and trickled over his hand. A thick, sickly wind stirred his hair and ruffled the fur of his hamel horn silk waistcoat. It carried the scent of his blood into the shadows. From out of the darkness came the soft, clattering noise of 1,000 razor-sharp teeth, gnashing impatiently. Uh-oh. Then the wind changed, and Twig gagged on the metallic stench of death. He scratched and scraped at the vine. He bit into it, only to spit out the vile bitterness in a moment later. He pulled, he prized, he tugged and tore at the vine, but it was too tough. He couldn't break its ferocious grip. He could not get free. Suddenly, the vine gave a tremendous yank, and Twig was wrenched forwards. Uh-oh. He sputtered as he landed with a thud on the forest floor, and his mouth was filled with the rich, brown, loamy soil. It tasted of tilder meat sausages? But rancid, sour. He retched emptily and spat again. "Stop!" Twig screamed, but the tarry vine paid him no heed. Over rocks and tree stumps it dragged its victim, through the wood nettles and tripweed, bumping, banging, crashing. Uh-oh. Twig knew, however, that no matter how badly he was knocked and battered and stung, the worst was still to come. Passing a comb bush, he clutched desperately at a branch and clung on for dear life. Where was the caterbird now that he needed him? For a moment the vine snagged on some roots. A squeal of sudden fury echoed from the shadows, and the tarry vine sent a wave of whiplash rippling along its length. Twig gripped as tightly as he could onto the branches, but the vine was too strong. The bush sprang out of the ground, roots and all, and Twig found himself being bumped along over the forest floor even faster than before. Below him now were hard, white, knobbly objects, which dug into him as the tarry vine dragged him on. The further he went, the more there were. Twig gasped with sudden terror. They were bones, thigh bones, backbones, ribs, and empty, grinning skulls. I'll show you in a minute. "No, no, no!" Twig screamed, but the air was dead, and his cries were snuffed out by the blood-red light. Here's the picture. See that right there? The bones, yikes! Jerking his head around, Twig peered into the shadows in front of him. He saw a tree trunk, thick and rubbery, that grew out of the white mound where the bones lay thickest. It pulsed and squealed. It glistened with sticky saliva, which oozed from countless gaping suckers. From high above him, where the branches divided, Twig heard the gnashing of 1,000 mandible-like teeth, as each one opened and shut noisily, greedily, louder and louder and louder. It was the sound of the terrible, flesh-eating blood oak. "My knife," thought Twig feverishly, as the clattering grew faster, the stench fouler, and the squealing increasingly agitated. He fumbled around on his belt feverishly and gripped the smooth handle of his naming knife. Then, with one swift movement, he pulled it from its sheath, swung his arm over his head, and brought the blade down with all his strength. There was a sound of soggy splintering, and the spurt of glistening green slime squirted onto his face. Yet as his arm suddenly jerked back, Twig knew he'd done it. He wiped the slime from his eyes. Yes, there it was, the vine swaying hypnotically to and fro above him. Back and forwards it went, back and forwards, to and fro. Twig was rooted to the spot. He watched transfixed as it swerved, as its severed end stopped dripping and the liquid congealed to form a knobby green blob at the end of the vine, the size of his fist. Abruptly, the rubbery skin split and the blob burst open, and with a rasping slurp, a long tentacle tipped with emerald green sprang out. It sensed the air and quivered. Then a second tentacle appeared, and a third. Twig stared, unable to move. Where one vine had been, now there were 3. They reared up, ready to strike, and whoosh! All 3 of them lunged. Twig screamed with pain and terror as the tentacles lashed themselves around his ankles. Then, before he could do anything about it, the terry vine tugged his feet out from under him and hoisted him upside down high up into the air. The whole forest blurred before Twig's eyes as the blood rushed to his head. It was all he could do to keep hold of the knife. Wiggling and squirming and grunting with effort, he heaved himself up, clung hold of the vine, and began jabbing and stabbing. "For sky's sake, let me go!" he cried. Green slime immediately began bubbling to the surface. It oozed around the knife and over his hand, oily and slippery. Twig lost his grasp and tumbled back through the air. Dangling helplessly by his feet, he twisted his neck back and looked down. He was above the top of the main tree trunk. Directly beneath him were the 1,000 razor-sharp teeth. Oh, I'll show you a picture. He had heard chattering so greedily. Arranged in a wide circle, they glinted in the red light. Oh my gosh, how scary. Oh my gosh, she's gonna go in it maybe. Okay, let's see. All at once they sprang open. Twig found himself staring down into the crimson gorge of the bloodthirsty tree. It slobbered and slavered noisily. The stench was atrocious. Twig gagged emptily. Now he would never ride the sky pirate's ships, nor reach his destiny, nor even leave the Deepwoods. With his last bit of energy, Twig struggled frantically to pull himself upwards again. The hamel-horn silk skin waistcoat slipped down over his eyes. He felt the fur stiffen as he rubbed the wrong way. Again and again he reached up, and finally he managed to clutch hold of the vine. As he did so, it released his feet. Twig cried out with fear as he swung loose and dug in with his fingernails. Now, instead of trying to cut himself free, he was desperate to hold on, desperate not to be dropped down into the gaping mouth of the blood oak. Hand over hand, he tried to climb the vine, but slippery with slime, it slid back between his fingers. For every inch he went up, he slithered back half a dozen. "Help!" he whined softly. "Help me!" The vine gave a violent jerk. Twig lost his grip, and the terry vine flicked him away. Feet first, arms flailing, he dropped through the air. He landed with a sickening squelch deep down inside the cavernous mouth of the flesh-eating blood oak. The teeth snapped shut above him. Oh no! It was pitch black. Here's a picture. Oh my gosh! It was pitch black in the tree and loud with the sound of the hideous gurgling. "I can't move," he gasped. All around him the monstrous throat constricted, and rings of hard, woody muscle squeezed him tightly. I can't breathe." One thought went round and around in his head, too awful to take in. "I'm being eaten alive!" Deeper and deeper down he went. Eaten alive! Suddenly the blood oak juddered. A rumbling, grumbling burp burbled up from the inner depths of the tree, and a blast of foul air gushed up past Twig. For an instant, the muscles released their grip. Twig gasped and slipped down a little further. The thick hair on the hamel-horn silk skin waistcoat bristled as it was brushed up the wrong way. The blood oak juddered again. The gurgling grew louder as the blood oak continued to cough until the whole spongy tube shook with a deafening roar. Beneath him, Twig felt something strange pressing against the bottom of his feet, pushing him upwards. All at once, the retching tree released its grip on Twig's body for a second time. It had to get rid of the spiky object which had become lodged in its throat. It burped, and the pressure of the air which had built up below suddenly exploded with such violence that it shot Twig back up the hollow trunk. He burst into the air with a loud pop and soared off into a shower of spittle and slime. And for a moment, Twig felt he was actually flying. Up and away he went, as free as a bird. And then down again, crashing through branches as he hurtled back to the ground. He landed with a heavy thud that jarred every bone in his body. For a moment he lay there, scarcely daring to believe what had happened. "You saved my life," he said, smoothing the fur of the hamel horn skin waistcoat. "Thank you for your gift, Ma Tatum." Hurt, but not that badly, it occurred to Twig that something must have broken his fall. He reached below him tentatively. "Oi!" a voice protested. Startled, Twig rolled over and looked up. Not something, but somebody. He tightened his grip on the knife, still in his hand. Dawn, dawn, dawn. The next chapter is called The Guile Goblin Colony. Okay. Whew, I'm so glad that hamel horn skin saved him. Whoa, that was scary.